Kevin, it's SummerSlam week, and it's only fitting we do a wrestler bio on one of the greatest of all time, point blank period, Randy the Macho Man Savage. This is going to be a big wrestler bio, as are all ours. We did Code Angle last time. You guys loved that. The reception was amazing. This time, Kevin, we're doing the Macho Man. So first off, how you doing, pal?
I'm lovely, pal. I gotta plug the Spotify, the podcast platforms at the top. Give it a listen. The link will be in the description. You can see us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, Pandora, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts from. Any audio platform, we're on there. You'll hear our lovely voices. You won't see our smiling faces, but you will hear our lovely voices. So yeah, with that being said, got the plug out of the way. How are you, pal? I know you did a lot of preparation for this show. You watched like 20 hours of Macho Man footage, you told me, over this week? This is your full-time job now, pal. You're doing Elite Heat full-time. We're raking in the cash, pal. You're watching Macho Man Randy Savage clips at 3 in the morning. How do you feel?
Well, and for a quick behind the scenes for the listeners of the show, Kevin does a lot of the production, a lot of the like the edits, the putting the audio up, the Spotify, the back end platforms. It's only fair for me to really put effort into making sure these are the best quality shows we can get. So I'm watching a lot of the Randy Savage stuff, as the case with most wrestler bios we do, and just most content we do generally. I try and be as informed as possible. I know Kevin does as well for these shows, so we give you guys the best sort of podcast we can. So yeah, I did a lot of watching of Randy Savage stuff. A bit of his documentary from WWE like 8 years ago, not the A&E one that Kevin will get to later. I did a bunch of watching of the classic Randy Savage matches. Savage Steamboat from Mania 3, Savage Hogan WrestleMania 5, Savage Warrior Mania 7. I watched WrestleMania 8, Savage and Flair for the WWF title. So plenty of great stuff there. And just generally, I feel well prepared for this. There's a lot of stuff to go into. As you know, if you've been listening to our show for a while, we don't do like match by match reviews of anything. We literally just go big questions. What are the main things you need to know with X wrestler? And we're going to deep dive into it. So, Kevin, do you want to start us off, pal? Do you want to hit the ground running, pal? Start us off.
Yeah, I'll just ask you, what makes Randy Savage, what makes the Macho Man such an iconic character in the annals of WWE history?
Yeah, Kevin, when I look at Randy Savage, he ticks pretty much all the boxes. I know when we're doing Kurt Angle, which was our last bio, we said similar things, that he ticks near enough every box. Savage, my main takeaway from all the stuff I've watched with him, one, he had that larger than life superhero presentation you need to be a real top echelon like main event wrestler in professional wrestling. The attires were just unbelievable. You got like the big robe, like the capes almost, where you got the really sparkly, colorful, just big presentation. The sort of thing where he comes down and then you like your attention is just locked on him. You're glued to him. So there's the attire. The intensity, this is one that we see, and we've talked about this in previous shows, Kevin, quite a bit with the all-time like top tier Mount Rushmore and top 10 to 15 guys. They have one thing in common for the most part, really good intensity. Like they are switched on, they're locked in. Randy Savage, especially with promos, but even in the ring, especially, always switched on, always locked in. When you bring that intensity, as a viewer, it makes you more engaged. Think, okay, this guy's locked in. I want to see like what's he going to do? What's he going to say? What's he going to do? So there's that distinctive Kevin, the promo style. We're going to talk about this more later on, but his infamous promos, the oh yeah, like that sort of thing, and how he would execute promos. Yes, at the time in the 80s and the early 90s, everyone was big, everyone was expressive. That was just what he did. But Savage's style was so distinctive that it was above all the rest, in my opinion. And yeah, Miss Elizabeth, and I mean, in the ring, he was really good as well. Like he was basically the complete package of a wrestler. So that's my sort of initial answer, Kevin. I'll hit a bounce pass to you, pal. Talk to us. What, in your opinion, makes Savage so great? Hit us.
Well, for one, it's the character. I think that's the main thing that sets Randy Savage aside from everyone else, really. He's arguably the most unique character in the history of pro wrestling. The voice, like you said, the intensity, the style of promos, and a lot of what you said, the attire, just the whole Macho Man Randy Savage package, just all in one. It's a spectacle, and it's something that people remember. Uh, Anybody can quote the catchphrases. Some of the most iconic and memorable catchphrases of all time. The "Oh yeah," the "Dig it," like the Elizabeth, the way he said it, his voice. That was a big part of it. His raspy voice, a voice unlike any other. But on top of that, really, his legacy is the fact that he's one of the most influential performers to ever step foot in a wrestling ring. That coupled with that, like his character, you couple that with his WrestleMania 3 match with Ricky Steamboat, he inspired an entire generation of wrestlers. Guys like Chris Jericho, Shawn Michaels, even some older guys, or some younger guys, sorry, like CM Punk. Guys like that have just been influenced. But that generation, the people that grew up watching those guys at that time, the John Cena's of the world that were watching like Randy Savage and Ricky Steamboat have their match and then watching Hogan. Like, when you talk about the golden era of the WWF, you talk about the mid 80s, the late 80s, the early 90s, Randy Savage is one of the names that's at the very top of the list of the most important and influential and critical characters to that time frame.
And Kevin, one thing I will say, obviously, I'm the younger one here, so I'm 20 as we speak. I did not grow up watching Randy Savage. I've seen, in passing, the WrestleMania 3 match. Obviously, I know of Savage. I've seen some stuff. But really, what I found when I really deep dive into Randy Savage in the past couple days in preparation for this is you can see, as you touch on, what makes him so influential. You can see parts of Savage and so many of the guys who would come after Randy Savage. You mentioned a few of them there: Jericho, Michaels, Punk. These sort of guys who, for this generation and for the last 20, 25 years, have been in main events, upper mid card, just all over WWE as the big stars. So much of what makes those guys what they are spawns from Randy Savage. Randy Savage was really the one who did it first in many ways in that regard. It was, and at the time, Kevin, when I watch this back now, yes, for instance, some of the matches with Hogan, with Ultimate Warrior, even the Steamboat match. Nowadays, Kevin, there are more polished, crisp looking, well executed matches by wrestlers who are more so just acrobatic, yes. But for that match in 1987, 36 years ago, for them to do what they could do, absolutely was a pioneering, trailblazing match in wrestling. And we'll talk about this more in a minute, but it's the presentation. It truly was ahead of its time. And so many of the all-time greats in wrestling have taken bits and pieces from the Macho Man Randy Savage, be that the outfits, the character, the distinctive promo style, the wrestling style, even bits of the gear and all of it, having the valet manager, all of it. So Randy Savage, absolute all-time great, as we'll continue to touch on throughout this bio, pal.
Yeah, and I want to say this too for younger people like us. We're both in our 20s. Neither one of us grew up watching Randy Savage. My earliest memory of seeing Randy Savage was in the Spider-Man movie. When he appeared in, I believe it was the original Spider-Man, when he appeared in that movie and he basically wrestled Spider-Man, and he was great in it. That's really the only time that I saw Randy Savage live. Maybe a couple times in TNA, but that was later years, and it really wasn't the Randy Savage of old. But my point being here is that Randy Savage is so influential, and he transcended generations. That everyone, you, me, people older than me, people younger than me, we were all aware of Randy Savage. It's kind of like when you look at like hip hop culture. He's like Biggie or Nas or Wu-Tang Clan. Like, yeah, we didn't grow up listening to those albums and those artists, but if you're a hip hop fan, you know who they are. And Randy Savage is similar. He's in that elk with like Ric Flair and Hogan and Ultimate Warrior. It's just guys like that everybody knows, regardless of age. Some wrestlers, unfortunately, they get kind of like left by the wayside as time goes. Like, you think of names maybe like Bam Bam Bigelow or like Hercules. Guys like that, not everybody in culture knows, or not every wrestling fan knows who they are, but everyone knows who Randy Savage is. And realistically, his last WWE appearance was in 1994. He never appeared after that. He did WCW, yes. He was in WCW throughout the Monday Night Wars, and then he was in TNA in like the early mid 2000s. But he passed away in 2011. He passed away.
Yeah.
He didn't appear on WWE TV for 17 years. And he was hardly mentioned too, on top of that. We'll get into all that stuff about him not being mentioned and the blackball from the industry. I made a whole video on it on my channel. we'll get to that. But with all that being said, like the blackballing and the not appearing for 17 years till his death, he still was just someone that you couldn't mention wrestling without talking about Randy Savage at some point.
No, 100%. And one more thing before we start to go into our questions and our like a structured discussion with this. Oliver, you mentioned how nowadays everyone just knows of Randy Savage. Whether it's that Macho Man T-shirt, the one that's either purple or whatever color with like the sunglasses and Macho Man. That's very common. I've seen that shirt around. That's how common that shirt is. Whether it's his matches, everyone knows this WrestleMania 3 match we're about to touch on. You know of him, and as I was just alluding to before, even if you haven't seen a bunch of Randy Savage stuff, trust me, I just did this the other day. Go back and watch it. You'll see really the foundation, the pioneer for a lot of what you see today is because of this guy, Randy Savage. So, Kevin, that being said, I'll ask you the question, and this will probably segue into a discussion here. What, in your opinion, is Randy Savage's best match? Like, what do you think's the best Randy Savage match, pal?
It's his match versus Ricky Steamboat. I don't even think that could be argued. I think that's
Yes.
objective, honestly. Like
Yeah.
that's a top 3, top 5 wrestling match of all time. And that match laid the groundwork, laid the blueprint for the wrestling that we still see to this day. That the storytelling, the work in the injury, that the what was it, the larynx, Randy Savage when he destroyed Ricky Steamboat's larynx. At that time, people thought wrestling was real. Like my family can attest to this. My family was really young. Like my brothers and my sister, they were like maybe 10, 11 when this happened. And my sister cried for like a week because she thought Randy Savage legitimately hurt Ricky Steamboat. It's just we don't see stuff like that anymore, and I have a unique connection to it, having an older family that can really relate to me what it was like growing up at that time. But man, I would love to go in a time capsule and just sit down and watch WrestleMania 3, watch the build up to it, watch those weekly or bi-weekly shows, however WWE structured their TV, watch the build up to that match and watch it play out. Like that's probably the number one thing if I could go back in time and watch live and just experience it as it happened. In front of 93,000 people in the Pontiac, what was it, Silver Dome? Is it
Yeah.
Silver Dome or Superdome? Hulk Hogan got me
Ask
confused
Hogan,
now.
pal. Ask Hulk Hogan, pal. Ask Terry Bollea that question. But Kevin, I'll just carry on with what you're alluding to there. The thing I love about this, and this is just a general thing about WrestleMania 3, real quick. This match being, the best match of the show, as well as obviously Hogan Andre. It's just such like a simpler time. Wrestling was so simple. It was Hogan was the guy you'd support. You wanted him to win Hulkamania, and then he'd be wrestling this big, like dastardly huge 7'5" giant. In this case, with Randy Savage, you want to boo him. You're cheering for Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. You want him to beat this, year-long IC champion Randy Savage. It was just a simple time. The presentation was so well done. It felt, as you alluded to with your old family, like this felt like real. You didn't quite know yet. Like the word wasn't quite out, so it was just the whole presentation. Watching this, it's awesome to go back and watch. That's why WrestleMania 3 especially is heralded so highly by people from that era particularly, and just generally all time. It ages really well. Like I went back and watched this now. This is now 39 and a half, nearly 40 years later, well, 36 and a half years later, nearly 37 years. It just ages so well. So when it comes to Savage and Steamboat, as I was sort of alluding to a bit earlier, nowadays, Kevin, yeah, we may see more crisp execution of moves. There might be more well executed things with Osprey and Omega and Brian Danielson. They may have a smoother flow through the match. But this match for 1987, for what they managed to do with how it was choreographed, how they, as you say, worked the injury, the larynx, how they told the story, commentary was incredible. The commentary from Ventura and Monsoon, oh my God. Like it made it that much better. The crowd was really into every move. And Randy Savage, and they had Elizabeth and George the Animal Steel pal
Oh
with his
yeah.
hairy back pal. Just an amazing match. It was only 14, 15 minutes. This didn't need to be 35. This didn't need to be a Tokyo Dome Japanese epic that goes for 65 minutes. This was 14, 15 minutes. And it was literally flawless, essentially. So just what a match. What a match. Kevin, the significance today, I mean, I touch on it, but you watch this match back. I know you've seen this match. Most of us listening have seen this. You think now, 36 years later, how many wrestlers this match would have inspired? The style. I mean, talk to us on that. Just like the style these guys wrestled, what they did for wrestling.
So I remember Chris Jericho. I don't know when he said this. It was if it was on a podcast or a radio interview or if it was one of his documentaries. He talked about how he and his friends, maybe it was Lance Storm, how he and Lance Storm, when they were training to be wrestlers together, they literally mimicked this entire match. They memorized it move for move, hold for hold. And he said that Ricky Steamboat's arm drag is the greatest move he's ever seen in wrestling history. And it's one that he emulated. And you think about it, the arm drag. This match created the arm drag. This match created, like, obviously it was done before. Flair had been doing stuff like this, but it was done on a grander stage. The rest holds, the transitions, the fluidity. And the fact that Randy Savage planned this match out move for move, backstage with Steamboat, just so influential in so many ways. It wasn't the first. It wasn't maybe necessarily the innovator, but it was the biggest, the most influential. And it's something, like I was saying earlier, that we see nowadays with basic moves and basic storytelling. Modern day wrestling is literally built on this match. This match is like, for lack of a better term, or lack of a better analogy, this is the three-pointer of wrestling. This changed wrestling entirely. This was the birth for the faster-paced action. Prior to this match, what you got at WrestleMania, what you got at big WWF main event shows, or house shows, the WWF, what you saw was Bruno Sammartino would come in, he'd throw some fake punches at Pedro Morales, the crowd would chant, you get a 6.5, 7-minute match, and it was all pomp and circumstance, it was all show, it was flash. This match brought actual quote-unquote wrestling into the fold. This paved the way for guys like Jericho to come along, guys like Eddie Guerrero, guys like Rey Mysterio, like Shawn Michaels. And everybody wanted to emulate this match. Everybody from that time frame. Maybe now it's not at the same level. Like, you think now, guys probably look back to like Triple H and Shawn Michaels, Undertaker and Shawn Michaels for WrestleMania 25, maybe Bret and Austin for WrestleMania 13. Even some of the younger guys probably look at like Omega and Ospreay or Omega and Okada. They look at matches like that, or some of Bryan Danielson's matches. But a specific generation that ends up birthing the greatest era of wrestling were raised on this, and its effects are still being showed today. Now, before you go, I want to transition here for a moment. I want to talk about this. Ricky Steamboat versus Savage, WrestleMania 3. We gave that a lot of praise. I want to touch on just some of his other great matches. So I want to ask you, like, what are like your 5 or 6 or 3? Well, what are your favorite Randy Savage matches?
Yeah, so for me, obviously that one's like the main one, but really the match against Flair is very underrated from WrestleMania 8, and I think it's maybe because the show ended with Hogan and the Warrior runs out and Sid Vicious, and it was WrestleMania 8. It was still the Hogan sort of time, but
yeah.
really,
Can I interject real quick? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Psycho Sid main evented 2 more WrestleManias than your GOAT, Philip Jack Brooks.
Incredible, isn't it? Just incredible. Kevin Owens' main evented 2, CM Punk's main evented 9.
Yeah, the fact that Psycho Sid main evented 2 WrestleManias is that's just more of a slight than Kevin Owens. Like, Kevin Owens deserves it. Psycho Sid
Vicious.
Disgusting.
Psycho Sid Powell, ridiculous. But nonetheless, I look at Savage and Flair, that match, and I mean we'll touch on it probably a bit more later, but just want to say now that was awesome. Like, this is Randy Savage, a guy who, as we're rightfully praising, is just an absolute legend who has so much great to him, and Ric Flair, who's a Mount Rushmore guy, objectively. So that match was awesome, WrestleMania 8. I love that one. Even the match at WrestleMania 7, which we'll touch on a bit later on with the Ultimate Warrior, this is Jim Hellwig. This isn't like an in-ring sort of specialist, but the way they managed to tell the story, the emotion of that match, like, I'm watching and going, this has no right being as good as it is. This is the Ultimate Warrior, who, as everyone who knows the Ultimate Warrior, everyone who watched him during that era would attest to and describe, Jim Hellwig's in-ring ability was the equivalent to a bucket of piss. The guy could literally do, a big splash. Oh, he's punching. Oh, but Randy Savage got like this 4.5 star, like, great. Oh my God, match. Some people give it 5 stars, and fair enough, so because of the storyline. Like, that match was great as well. And, furthermore, I personally love the WrestleMania 5 match. I watched this one as well. Yeah, maybe it wasn't like the greatest Randy Savage. Like, Randy Savage had better matches than WrestleMania 5, but just the circumstance of it, the main event of WrestleMania 5, Trump Plaza, the Mega Powers storyline. You're wrestling Hulk Hogan in the absolute prime of Hulkamania, just about. Like, a match like that's great as well. So Randy Savage, he's had a lot of hits. And I'm not even mentioning matches on, SummerSlams or non-WrestleManias. I'm just mentioning like the big WrestleMania matches off the top of my head. So for me, just to recap there, obviously Steamboat Savage is one. I'd probably put Savage and Flair number 2 personally. I just really enjoyed that match. I'd put Savage and Hogan, WrestleMania 5, really up there. I'd put the WrestleMania 7 match, Savage and Ultimate Warrior, as really the main sort of highlights for me. With Savage, he's obviously had other great matches, Kevin, which you can, give us in a moment. But yeah, to me, those are like the top sort of couple with him.
I love it. I'm going to throw some out there for you. Others that you didn't mention. Some of my favorites is his match versus Diamond Dallas Page. No disqualification match from Spring Stampede, 1997. A little WCW action in there, pal.
WCW. Margo.
And you can never go wrong with the original SummerSlam main event. The Mega Powers, pal. The Mega Powers versus the Mega Bucks. Ted DiBiase and Andre the Giant squaring off against the Pythons, brother. Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage. Just one of the best tag team matches you'll ever see. Absolutely, undeniably incredible. Then there was the other match that Savage and Warrior had at SummerSlam 92. Really good match. Not as good as the WrestleMania 7 match, but still pretty good. So Ultimate Warrior had 2.5 good matches in his entire career, and 2 of them are thanks to the late great Randy Poffo. So that alone is a big plus to Randy Savage's legacy. The fact that he was able to get not 1, but 2 good matches out of Jim Hellwig, the Ultimate Warrior. That's incredible. Go ahead.
Yeah, and one more thing on these matches, which especially for me, I found in the WrestleMania 3 match with Savage and Steamboat and the WrestleMania 5 match with Savage and Hogan. One of the big things with Savage, he's great. We've established sort of the main things why he's so good. But one of the things you need with wrestling especially is great commentary to supplement that. Because you can have a really great talent.
Oh,
but
yeah.
if the commentary is Corey Graves and Byron Saxton, it's not going to be as great as if it's Jim Ross and Gorilla Monsoon or, Jesse the Body and whoever, if you know what I'm saying. So I look at the commentary for these matches. WrestleMania 3, Jesse the Body Ventura, incredible. Like, him and Monsoon make Randy Savage and just that whole storyline with George Animal Steel kidnapping Miss Elizabeth and how ridiculous that was. And, Kevin, I open WrestleMania 3 on binge. I click on the sort of Savage and Steamboat part of the match. We get the match recap. Right away, I'm already gripped. Jesse the Body Ventura is screaming in his iconic voice. I'm not going to try and impersonate it.
Yeah,
I'm just going to read you what he says. Just the dialogue of this makes Randy Savage, makes everything involving that match just bigger. This is horrible, Monsoon. This is kidnapping. And Steamboat's a part of it. This is kidnapping and conspiracy. He's yelling this as George the Animal Steel, this big dude with a hairy back, this creepy-looking bloke, is carrying Miss Elizabeth against her will away from ringside. I'm like, this is such a ridiculous storyline.
Ridiculous.
Randy Savage, and the greatness of him makes this really good. And then you get to WrestleMania 3 in the actual match. The stuff with, like, the referee, for instance, one more thing with, Dave Hebner. Like, when he's counting, he's doing his job perfectly. Jesse the Body is yelling it's a conspiracy. It should have been a disqualification. Randy Savage was clotheslined too hard by Steamboat. That should be, a DQ. For what, Monsoon? Like, they're just, like, yelling, And, like, this is great stuff. Like, this is great wrestling commentary. It adds so much to the presentation of an all-time great like the Macho Man Randy Savage. It's all these little things. It's the theme music. It's the entrance, the stuff with Elizabeth, the commentary during matches. So many things go into making a wrestler a top-tier guy all time. Wrestlers can have a bunch of these elements, but you need sort of mostly all of them and not many weaknesses to really be in that top echelon, Kevin, as we know. And Randy Savage, the commentary from Jesse the Body, incredible. So I just wanted to touch on that.
Absolutely.
Will you have anything more on that or not, or we can just move on, pal?
Yeah, I want to say this. You mentioned it, that Randy Savage checked all the boxes. He's a 5-tool player. I just want to reiterate that point, touch on it just for a moment. He could do it all. He had the entrance with the iconic theme music that you mentioned. Just one of the best entrances of all time, one of the most recognizable theme music of all time. He could talk, great promo. He had the merchandise, the iconic merchandise, the character, He could go in the ring. He was a good commentator. He had the look. He looked like a wrestler. He looked like a comic book character. He looked like a larger than life hero. He had it all. And now with that being said, I'll ask you, was Randy Savage the number 2 guy in WWE's golden era?
He'd have to be, wouldn't he? Like, I look at, because obviously Hogan was the guy in that golden era, the 80s, the Hulkamania era, spilling into the early 90s. But then you look at like who was the second greatest guy in that time, and I mean, you got your Roddy Pipers, guys like that. Andre was infamous in that sort of time period. Ted DiBiase was great as well. But it's it's pretty much impossible to go past Randy Savage and what he offered. You look at, I mean, the Mega Powers match, you mentioned the SummerSlam 88 match with the Mega Powers and the Mega Bucks, that whole like year and a bit long storyline with Elizabeth that bled into the main event of WrestleMania 5. Savage was WWE champion for like a year straight as well in that sort of time period. And then spilling into the early 90s, you look at the match we mentioned against the Ultimate Warrior, who would also be up there. He'd be up there in the discussion. But yeah, I just think Randy Savage, he ticks too many boxes to not be, really. And you look at what he did, his impact that we still can talk about him today with how much influence he had. Like Kevin, Randy Savage versus the other guys who are also big in that time period. Do any really hold a candle as far as influence nowadays? Maybe Roddy Piper for how like his
Yeah.
outspoken style, his promos.
Oh,
From
yeah.
an influence standpoint, it would be Roddy.
Yeah.
But I mean, the Ultimate Warrior, I don't see that much of like Ultimate Warrior nowadays in modern wrestling or just generally wrestling the last 10, 15 years. I just don't. Randy Savage, you see elements of him all over the shop, and you have for the last couple decades. So I would say yes. Randy Savage was the number 2 in the golden era, which is a pretty big deal. Like, this is the golden era for wrestling. This is what many people consider the greatest wrestling period of all time. This Hogan era, Hulkamania, golden era. So that's my stance. Kevin, would you agree? Do you think Savage was the number 2 guy in the golden era?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's undeniable. I just want to say this, just explain this for a little bit for some certain people, because I know we might get this question or something, or this comment. We're talking strictly WWF. If you're talking wrestling in general in the 80s, Ric Flair was the number 2. It was Hogan and Flair, undeniably. Savage in the WWF was number 2, yes. If you're talking about overall consistent body of work, it was Randy Savage. Now, Ultimate Warrior had a higher peak than Savage. Ultimate Warrior overtook Hogan as the number 1 guy when Hogan was around. Yeah, Savage was the number 1 guy for most of '88, but that was because Hogan took time off to go film movies. So Savage kind of filled in for him. Ultimate Warrior was so big and so important and so iconic for a short period of time, but he was so big that he overtook Hogan and overlapped him while Hogan was actually there. Savage never hit that point, but if you talk about just memorability, consistency, I mean, Savage was there from like 85 to 94. Consistently, one of the cornerstones, one of the focal points of pro wrestling and WWF. And yeah, he's the guy that people will associate with this era more than Ultimate Warrior. It's always going to be Hogan 1, Savage 2. And there's nothing really wrong with being second to Hogan. I don't think.
Well, Kevin, one point I want to make now, and then we'll get you to carry on with that. I was thinking this needs to be made, because one thing I was thinking, when I was looking at the Wikipedia for Randy Savage and thinking back on his legacy, I'm going to read you, Kevin. This is Randy Savage's WWE resume. So, Kevin, this is the guy, as we've just explained here. When he came in about 86-ish through until 93, 94, his nearly decade-long run, as we're saying here, the number 2 guy in a boom period for wrestling, WWE here. Here's his resume. This is his resume. WWF champion twice, Intercontinental champion once. He won 1 King of the Ring, and he won that tournament to become WWE champion. So basically, that doesn't even count. He just won the WWE title. That's his resume. And then he was inducted in the Hall of Fame infamously years later, as we'll get to. That's literally his resume. 2 WWE titles, 1 Intercontinental title, and a King of the Ring. Compare that, Kevin, to a smorgasbord laundry list of wrestlers nowadays. I think The Miz, I think Randy Orton, their resumes are as long as literally like a 4-page Word document. You can just keep going and going with all the things they've won, these kayfabe accolades, but it had nowhere near the significance of Randy Savage. Randy Savage, as we'll talk about soon, had 1 Intercontinental Championship reign And I dare say he's the greatest Intercontinental Champion ever. He had 2 WWF Championship reigns. I think he's the second top guy in a boom period in the golden era, outside of Flair, who was in another company. Like, as I'm saying here, he didn't do much in the sense of like the sheer just list of accolades, but what he did was so significant, and he was so great with that and so memorable. It left a mark. So do with that what you will, Kevin. Pass it back to you.
But if you put Savage in today, and not even today, in the mid 2000s when Edge and Orton and Cena and all those guys played hot potato with the belts, and there were 2 belts, Savage would be like a 20-time champion. You know, if you put him in there in '09 when there was like 18 different WWE champions. Yeah, Savage, you put him around this era, he'd be a 10-time Intercontinental Champion, 8-time World Champion, tag team champion multiple times. Yeah. He would have done it all. He would have won Royal Rumbles, King of the Rings, Mr. Money in the Bank, whatever accolade you could possibly throw at him. Savage he'd have a bigger resume than all those guys you mentioned.
Yeah. But no, I thought it was worth mentioning because I looked at that and I'm like, that's literally 3 title runs and a King of the Ring. That's it. Yeah. And he's universally regarded as like, and as we're saying here, one of the absolute greatest of all time, one of the biggest foundation points in wrestling, one of the biggest influences. I just thought that's worth mentioning. I don't really hear that talked about much with Savage. Obviously, people talk about what we're discussing and some of maybe the controversies later on, but that I feel is worth mentioning. Because nowadays, as you allude to, one more thing on that, we don't see what Randy Savage did now. There aren't wrestlers who have won. I mean, Roman Reigns now, because he's had 1 title. I mean, he's got like 3 belts. He's, this champion for a bit. He's got the WWE title here, Slammy Awards, Grand Slam champion, IC, US, SmackDown tag, Raw tag, NXT North American. They're like those memes of Roman Reigns or Triple H with like 15 titles, like they're holding them. Randy Savage held 1 title at a time. It meant a lot because he was a big star and the belt felt important. He felt important, and the whole presentation was well done. So yeah, there's that point, Kevin. Let's move on.
Absolutely. All right, so do you want to move to the next point?
Yeah, I think that's fair. One more thing. Just I want to touch on the Mega Powers one more time because that was such a big deal at the time. Yeah. This is Hogan, the guy, and Savage, the number 2 guy. This big time storyline where they're on the same page, and there's conflict with Miss Elizabeth, who was brilliant, by the way. And then they lead to the big WrestleMania 5 match. Kevin, I'll ask you. I mean, as far as wrestling storylines all time, I know this is sort of like a off the cuff type question, but where does that sort of rank? The wrestling's had some all time great storylines, some big time year long story arcs, but for significance with who's involved, how memorable that was, how big it was. Talk to us about like where that would sort of rank and the significance of that.
Yeah, the Mega Powers tag team and the Mega Powers implosion, the Savage Hogan feud, has to be in consideration for top 10 storylines of all time, top 10 feuds of all time. It's super important for wrestling, and it was the feud. It was Hogan Andre, then Hogan Savage. Those were the feuds of the 80s, the defining storylines that people will remember for years and years and years to come. I'll paint just a little picture of the storyline. So, before SummerSlam 88, they start tag teaming. You get the iconic handshake. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, where they show it up and they're like, oh, we're going to shake hands, and they shake hands. And so much steroids, testosterone, protein powder, just crack, cocaine, who knows what's going on in there. So much like intensity and fire in those promos when you had those 2 guys on the same screen. Savage, the most intense wrestler ever. Hogan, one of the most intense wrestlers ever. You put them on a screen together, you had whoever was out there, Jimmy Hart with them, whoever it was, and the 3 of those guys going crazy. It's literally, that's what I think of when I think 80s wrestling. Are those backstage promos with those 2 guys, with Warrior. That's what it was, man. It was like Warrior screaming about spaceships and cockpits, and Randy Savage talking about God knows what, Elizabeth and her dress and whatever. Just so entertaining. Then at SummerSlam 88, the infamous moment where Miss Elizabeth, she strips out of her dress and she reveals her underwear. It was crazy. Distracted Andre the Giant and Ted DiBiase. Savage didn't like that. And then they have that little dissension I believe it was on Saturday Night's Main Event, getting closer to WrestleMania 5, where Savage accuses Hogan of looking at Elizabeth and touching her inappropriately. Then you see the clip of like Hogan touching her lower back, and you get the freeze frame on that. And Savage's like, look, Hogan, look, this is what you did. It's just great. And what made that work so well is because Savage was actually a lunatic in real life. Randy Savage was a legitimate lunatic who was very controlling and overprotective of Miss Elizabeth, and would have literally freaked out if somebody touched her like that. For real. And Bruce Pritchard, I believe it was, told this story on a podcast where Savage was coaching Hogan through that storyline and be like, hey, brother, don't you touch her. Don't you touch her. Don't get too low, brother. I'm watching your hand. So it just, stuff like that. The guy was so wired up, so intense in real life that it just transitioned well into the camera. And that's one thing I'd say this about modern day wrestling. That's what makes the Bloodline storyline go so well. The Samoan dynasty, the tribalism, that type of thing is real. That's a real thing. Tribal court is real. The Samoan lifestyle, the philosophy of family first, that's real. Already what goes on with those, the head of the table, all that stuff's real. You turn that up a notch, and that's what makes great TV. It was the perfect storm for that time frame.
No, I couldn't agree more. I just want to say with WrestleMania 5, which is like the culmination of that, I watched that and like my favorite part of just that whole thing, once it gets to the ring, they do the big pop and circumstance. Elizabeth's interviewed backstage and she's like seems distressed and she does her promo and it's hilarious. They have like a Randy Savage interview, as you say. Randy Savage is probably coked up. He's yelling in his infamous voice. He's intense. He's angry. He's nuts, Randy Savage. And then they do Elizabeth, and it's like the exact opposite. Like it was like a normal, chilled, everyday like person got interviewed, and she was just like, I just hope neither hurt each other, and the best man wins and the match, and it was like a normal, regular sort of person, and then within like a minute, it's like Hulk Hogan, roid rage, shouting, like it's just an incredible time. But I also want to touch on one more thing. When I'm watching this, just this moment I had watching it, Savage comes out. He's got the WWF Winged Eagle Championship. He's in Trump Plaza. It's WrestleMania's main event. He's got his incredible attire. Crowd's going crazy. Elizabeth's down there. And then Hogan comes out. And this whole thing, when you're a guy like Randy Savage, one of these all-time great guys, you need these WrestleMania main events, these like moments, these things that really transcend your legacy, these memorable points, great storylines, big memorable matches. So when Randy Savage is in the ring, he's got his incredible attire on, crowd's buzzing. Hogan's music hits, the iconic, Real American theme hits. Hogan's coming out, and you got Jesse the Body, Gorilla Monsoon shouting, "The greatest athlete in sports today!" As Hogan's got his like 15 security guards. He's winding up the crowd. He's pointing at Randy Savage. It's just, like that's wrestling.
Yes.
Like that's the great of wrestling. That's just, we've talked about, and it's been covered at length in the last decade, especially, what wrestling's become, and indie this, flip flop this, 50-minute matches, near falls, work rate, yada yada. Throw that out the bin. We don't care. This right here, Hogan, after this year-long incredible storyline, one of the great stories, an all-time great Randy Savage in the ring, Elizabeth, legendary commentators, WrestleMania main event, Hogan steaming out the Real American, like yelling at Randy Savage, like it's just
fantastic
awesome stuff. It's just, that's wrestling, pal. That's what we do it for, pal. We don't do it for 50-minute work rate trash, pal. There you go,
pal. Is Randy Savage the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time?
Yes.
He is.
Short answer. I mean, we've had this discussion on Elite Take like a month ago. I just wanted to rehash this because it's a Randy Savage bio. To me, Randy Savage is the greatest IC champion ever. We did a lot of the discussion on the IC title thing with the Steamboat match. We don't need to just deep dive the Steamboat match again. That match especially, as well as, the year and a bit he was IC champion, that's the greatest, most significant IC title run ever, in my opinion. I mean, you've had many great IC champions. We've discussed this. Jericho's held the belt, 9 times? Miz has held it a laundry list of times. But no one's on that same level as Randy Savage, in my eyes at least. So, Kevin, There you go. Do you agree? Well,
Of
you had him
course.
first or second, didn't you?
I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah, Savage is the
Yeah.
best. That match at WrestleMania 3, the Intercontinental Championship match, that does it right there. Then on top of that, he set that belt up with a lot of credibility. He set it up to be the number 2 championship. You know, if you held that belt in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, you were the next up. And it was that mentality. You were the next up, or you're the best guy in the ring, and Savage established that. He absolutely did it. 100% best Intercontinental Champion. Now, I'll ask you this. Go ahead.
Well, Kevin, I want to ask you. I mean, we touched on a match earlier involving a certain wrestler. I want to ask you this. Now, Kevin, I listed this as one of the great Randy Savage matches. This is WrestleMania 7 related. I want to ask you, like, let's be real here. Look, Kevin, let's cut the crap. Let's just be ruthless,
Yep.
cold-hearted, unfiltered podcasters here. This is elite effing heat, Kevin.
Yeah.
I want to ask you this.
Mhm.
Is Randy Savage getting an instant classic out of James Hellwig, the Ultimate Warrior, at WrestleMania 7? Is that Randy Macho Man Savage's greatest achievement? Because, Kevin, this is James Jim Hellwig, a man who, as we just said earlier, has the in-ring ability, in-ring talent of a bucket of steaming feces. So, Kevin, I'll ask you that. Was that Randy Savage's greatest achievement?
Oh, man. I mean, his greatest achievement, that's a bit scathing to say that. I don't think it's literally his greatest achievement, but I love the wording of that question. That WrestleMania 7 match was damn good. Randy Savage retiring, and then his reunion with Elizabeth that led to them getting married on WWE TV not too long after. But that moment where they embrace, you know, she hops in the ring, she beats up Sensational Sherry, Savage turns babyface, she's crying, he's crying, he asks her to marry him, the whole crowd is crying, they literally cut the people in the crowd, they got tears coming down their eyes. Just what a great match. Great in-ring storytelling. You don't see that anymore, I guess, in wrestling. I mean, you kind of do. We see storytelling nowadays, but it just doesn't hit the way that storytelling did. So, yeah, I mean, what a man, getting a great match out of Jim Hellwig. What an absolute, just unbelievable feat.
Yeah, great stuff. And Kevin, so there's that. Now, I think we've covered for the most part the really main, like, WWE, big, like, the highs of Randy Savage, what made him in the golden era so great. And from here, we can call, like, the rest of Randy Savage the sort of stuff where, as your channel discusses on Wrestling Uncovered, Kevin, there's more to wrestling than meets the eye. There's more to these WWE top stars than meets the eye. There's a lot of directions we can take this. I mean, there was an A&E hit piece. There was an infamous scandal and blackballing involving Stephanie McMahon, allegedly. And there's a lot to go on here. I'm going to pass this to you because this is your wheelhouse. Walk us through the sort of, I guess, the back end of Randy Savage. Yes, there was the WCW run. He was a 4-time big gold belt WCW champion, whatever. Talk to us about either his exit from WWE, the Stephanie McMahon thing, A&E. There's a lot to discuss, Kevin. I'm going to pass this to you. This is your wheelhouse. Talk to us about Randy Savage, pal.
All right. So, he retires in 1994. Retires for good from WWE. So he had the retirement in 91. Didn't last very long. And what happened behind the scenes was Vince McMahon felt that Savage was too old to wrestle anymore. So he pushed him to retire after WrestleMania 7. And Savage was like, wait, hold on, pal, hold on. And this is, you know, in the height of the steroid trials and the crackdown of the steroid jacked up guys. So Hogan was gone, Warrior was gone, you know, Rick Rude, a lot of those guys were all gone from WWE and WCW or whatever. So, you know, Vince wasn't really trying to have so much heat on Savage. One, due to not taking steroids, Savage didn't look the same that he did. So that, you know, you can say what you will about that. He didn't look the same. He's wearing different gear. He wasn't quite showing his muscles as much. So Vince was like, hey, pal, don't want you wrestling anymore. Eventually, Savage starts wrestling again. SummerSlam 92 comes along. Then he wrestles periodically, 93, 94. But he's also a commentator at this time. So then, randomly, Savage leaves WWF to go to WCW. Now, the story that we're told here is that he left because he wanted to wrestle, and WCW offered him the opportunity to wrestle. And then Vince, according to Bruce Pritchard, Vince McMahon said, "We're never talking about Savage again. We're not mentioning him. That's it. He's gone." And as we saw with Bruno, with Hogan, with you name it, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Ultimate Warrior, all these wrestlers from that time frame and that bashed Vince, that talked shit about him, they all came back. All of them. Every single last one of them. Except for Randy Savage. That he had the send-off where it was literally just Vince on commentary saying, "We wish you the best, Randy Savage, in your future endeavors." And that was it. No mention of him ever again on WWE TV, even until he passed away. Yeah, they did the 10-bell salute and all that, but throughout that time frame, there was never any talks about Savage coming back. You know, after WCW was bought out, nothing. He went to TNA. No return, no mention. Just, it was like, okay, why is this going on? The story that we're given, the reason that's out there is because Macho Man, when he left, he took the Slim Jim sponsorship with him to WCW. And apparently Vince had planned to give that to Bam Bam Bigelow, or whatever. I think it was somebody like that. So, apparently Vince blackballed Macho Man because of a Slim Jim commercial. Slim Jim sponsorship. Now, the conspiracy theorist in me, and in a lot of us wrestling fans, and I made a video about this, like I said, on my main channel, so I'm going to spend all day talking about it. Check out the video on my channel if you want to see it. There's a rumor out there that Macho Man Randy Savage had a relationship with an underage Stephanie McMahon back in the day. And Vince found out, and Linda found out. There's rumors that he got her pregnant, and there was an abortion. There's crazy rumors out there. So, yeah, that's allegedly what happened. Lanny Poffo was asked this in a shoot interview, and his answer was like, whoa. Like, he was like dancing the question, dancing around it, you know. So, I don't know. Whatever, what have you. I'm not saying that it's factual or anything, but that's the rumors. That's allegedly why Randy Savage was snubbed from the Hall of Fame up until his passing. And he was and is by far the biggest Hall of Fame snub in history. The fact that he didn't get to go in the Hall of Fame when guys like Iron Sheik and Bobby Heenan and Hogan and Steamboat and, you know, so on and so forth, when those guys all went in like 04, 05, 06, the fact that Savage never went in, kind of a joke. The Hall of Fame really felt incomplete until Randy Savage went in it. So it's just intriguing. All that stuff, talking about all that stuff. It's very intriguing. It's one of the most fascinating behind-the-scenes legends and behind-the-scenes stories. Macho Man, in general, is one of the most fascinating people behind the scenes. I could keep rambling here if you'd like.
Go for it. No, this is good stuff. This is good stuff. Carry on.
Yeah, there's so much here to talk about. So this A&E documentary comes out. So this is where things got kind of interesting. I don't know if you've seen any of the A&E documentaries, but I've watched a good amount. I haven't seen them all. I've probably watched like 7 or 8 of them. The ones I've seen, I watched like Booker T, Shawn Michaels, you know, Stone Cold, I can't remember what else, Roddy Piper, and I watched Macho Man's. And I watched Macho Man's because I listened to Jim Cornette review it. And I was like, wow, I gotta see this. Basically, they were calling it a hit piece, Jim Cornette and Brian Last calling it a hit piece, saying that it was unlike any of the other documentaries. So you watch like Steve Austin's, for example. They make no mention of Steve Austin's like horrific personal life and background and some of the things he's been alleged of and been arrested for. No mention of that. Shawn Michaels, they make little mention, but they do mention his past being a dick. Not too much mention of his drug history, you know, his history of infidelity, his history of bullying talent backstage. A lot of that stuff's conveniently left out. Same with Flair. They don't talk about, you know, the plane ride from hell, stuff like that. But this A&E documentary, this biography about Randy Savage, it started out fine, just like the others. You know, you got wrestlers. I don't even know who was on it. I'll just say names, like guys like AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, guys like that, talking about how great Randy Savage was, how influential he was. You got Lanny Poffo on there. You got Savage's mother. You had, you know, so on and so forth. You had all these guys from his past. Hogan. They're all talking about how great Savage is. And then like 45 minutes into the documentary, it just takes a fucking left turn. And you got Savage's ex-girlfriend from WCW. I can't remember her name. It slips my mind. But the valet, what was her name? Damn, I can't remember. But
Oh yeah. It escapes me, but yeah, I get the point. So they're doing the documentary.
yes,
You know,
yeah.
it's flowery, it's roses, the legacy of Randy Savage. He's amazing, he's wonderful. Then what happens, Kevin?
Yeah, so this valet that he dated, on-screen valet for WCW, she starts talking about what it was like dating Randy Savage. And it just get all this stuff where she's like, oh, I went to his house one time, and I went in his closet, and I saw the security camera set up in his closet, and he had bugged my house. He was watching security footage of my house. He was watching me 24/7. He didn't let me go anywhere. She insinuated a physical and verbal abuse, but didn't allege it or confirm it. But it was insinuated that he was abusive to her. And again, this is not Dark Side of the Ring. This is the A&E biography. This is like where we're celebrating the greats. But no, not with Randy Savage's. And then you got like this freaking radio show host from Tampa is talking shit about Savage, and Hogan. Like they were like they had this personal feud. And I'm sure you've seen it. They're talking about Savage made a diss track. Savage had a rap career, dropped a rap album. He made a diss track about Hogan. So then you got Hogan and this radio show host on this documentary. They're burying Savage, like saying that yeah he's a great guy, but you know he had a dark past. And there's another juicy story here. So I don't remember what event this was, but it was in the mid '90s. Hulk Hogan had a black eye at a WWE event. Now the rumor is, and Hulk Hogan talks about this in the story. Hogan and his wife were in Miami shooting a movie. Miss Elizabeth got tired of the insinuated abuse. Hogan and his ex-wife insinuated that Savage abused Elizabeth as well on this documentary. So you got that part in there. Hogan's talking about this, and he's like, oh, we're in a hotel in Miami. Elizabeth, she calls my wife, and she's like, I'm leaving Randy. I'm going to go stay at the hotel with you guys. Savage shows up at the hotel, sees Elizabeth, sees Hogan, sees Hogan's wife, punches Hogan in the face, allegedly. This is not... Hogan didn't talk about this, but allegedly punches Hogan in the face. That's why he has the black eye. He says he got the black eye from a skiing incident or whatever. He got kicked by an animal or whatever the fuck he said. But most likely he got beat up by Savage at this story that Hogan's telling on this A&E biography. And he's taught, like, he and his ex-wife are insinuating that Savage abused Elizabeth. Like, it's crazy. Like, what is going on? Both these people are dead, Savage and Elizabeth. And this is what's being written, portrayed about them on TV? Like, I was watching it like, what is this? Like... It doesn't make any sense. There's definitely bad blood because this is a WWE produced biography. There's still bad blood, even though he's in the Hall of Fame, even though his brother would get in. There's still definitely bad blood there, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I will say just one thing on the Hall of Fame, and I'm sure, I mean, you probably have something else to say on this. This is your wheelhouse. That's why I'm really letting Kevin tell the stories here. Kevin knows way more about this than me. I'm not going to try and act like I know a lot about sort of the darker side or like the behind the scenes or the stories or the podcast or shoot interviews, the he said, she said of behind the scenes wrestling history. But I was going to say on the Hall of Fame, the fact that it took till 2015 for WWE to begrudgingly put Randy Savage in the Hall of Fame, there's something like there must have been something. And the Stephanie McMahon thing is the one that, I mean, you made the video on, and it's like the rumor. And if what you said is true there with, I mean, you mentioned abortions or the underage stuff. There's a lot of like dark stuff with that.
Yeah.
But Randy Savage, the second biggest star in the golden era, a guy who, as we'll discuss in a moment, his like all-time ranking in wrestling, for that guy to be inducted in 2015, that was Coco Beware was in there by then.
Yeah.
Kevin. Coco Beware was in there by then. Iron Sheik was in there like over a decade before, roughly. The
Big
Hall of Fame
Boss
started
Man.
in The Hall of Fame started in 96, did it, or was it 04?
It was 93 when Andre the Giant passed away. He was like the first inductee, and then they did it again in like 96, 97 in that time frame. And then it was 04 when they picked it up and did it every year.
Like that's bull. Like that's a joke. Like
It is.
2015. So clearly, I mean, there's bad blood. Bad blood's a thing in wrestling. You listed about 5 minutes ago all the guys: Bruno, Warrior, Hogan, yada yada. There's a lot of guys with like had bad blood and it got hashed eventually. Savage, it never happened. So there is something or some things that were either known about or Savage had issue with this, or there must be something because you connect the dots with this stuff, and to take to 2015 for WWE to quite literally begrudgingly put him in after his death, 4 years after his death. It wasn't even the year after he died. It was 4 years after he died, which that's not great. And there was clearly something. There's water under the bridge, or I don't know what was going on. So there's a lot of speculation, a lot of rumors. I'm not going to buy in too much of the hearsay and accuse anyone of anything, but something's up. Something's up, Kevin. So back to you. Once again, your wheelhouse. Anything else you want to share on that, or anything of the Hall of Fame, or?
Yeah, I don't understand why. Like, we gotta know why at some point. Like, it has to come out. There has to be something. The explanation we got for Bruce Pritchard is that Vince was mad over a fucking Slim Jim sponsorship. Like, that's not enough reason.
No,
Yeah,
that's not it.
that's not enough reason to produce a documentary where you got Hulk Hogan talking about how he abused his wife, Elizabeth, who, like, neither one of them are here to defend themselves. Like, why are we learning about this? And we've seen, I mean, people have seen the stories. Like, we've seen multiple wrestlers, like Honky Tonk Man, from that era, Ted DiBiase, Iron Sheik, Jim Cornette, tons of people have talked about how Savage was controlling and maybe abusive to Elizabeth. We've heard the stories that were on this documentary about the hotel room. We've all seen it in shoot interviews. Why are you putting on a platform like A&E, a major platform where thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are watching this documentary? This doesn't make sense. But yeah, it's weird that Savage is treated that way. It's kind of unlike anything else we've seen in wrestling, because everybody else made amends. The only time Savage ever did anything WWE related, from the time he left in '94 till his passing, was a commercial for WWE All Stars, the video game that came out in like 2010.
Yep.
And I don't think he was directly involved with WWE. I'm sure that was the game that reached out to him and wanted him to do the commercial. So maybe that was a gateway for him to come back before he passed away, because we did see that happen with Warrior and Kurt Angle and guys like that. That's how they got brought back, was through the video games. Maybe he was going to come back before he passed away and it didn't get to come to fruition. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's move on from that.
One last thing I will say, just to kind of put a bow on that. The fact that, once again, just to restate one last time, this is the number 2 guy in the golden era. This is one of the all-time greats of wrestling. This is one of the guys who made WWF at the time what it was and catapulted the success of WWE globally, generally. That guy has been blackballed for decades. WWE didn't want to even mention. Vince McMahon was like, no, we're not mentioning Randy Savage. We're giving him the Benoit treatment, so to speak. Randy Savage wanted nothing to do with WWE up until his passing. He was involved in literally nothing from, the 17 years between him leaving the company in '94 and then him tragically passing away, of the heart attack in 2011. 17 years, he wanted nothing to do with it. 4 years after his death, they begrudgingly put him in the Hall of Fame. That's more than a Slim Jim issue with a sponsorship. That's just not it. Something's happened. Some things have happened. So there's that. We'll park that there, Kevin. Unless you want to even go further, I just want to ask you now. With all this being said, we'll put the kind of the bow on the bio, which I thought this has been a really good Randy Savage bio, and hopefully after it, a lot of you guys can maybe go back and watch some of the best Randy Savage stuff, because trust me, I've done it. It's really good. It's worth it. So Kevin, I'll ask you, I guess all time now, when you're ranking guys, when we look at Randy Savage, where do you sort of put him? We don't need like an exact number. We're not doing our lists yet. We're not at that stage, but general ballpark figure. Where are we sort of thinking? When I ask you, where's Randy Savage all time? Where are you putting him?
I'd say he's top 12. I put him right in there in the top 12. I don't have him in that tier 1 with Taker, with Rock, Austin, Cena, Shawn Michaels, Flair, Hogan. I don't have him in that tier, but he's in that next tier with the Triple H's, the Brock Lesnar. I got him right there with Bret Hart. You know,
Mm.
guys like that. He's in that upper echelon. I think that top seven, top eight, that's reserved for the guys that were just the absolute number ones in wrestling. You know, Rock wasn't technically a number one. I mean, he overtook Austin by like 2000, 2001, 02, but he didn't come around long enough. Like, if you put him in a different era, Rock's gonna be number one. Would Savage be number one in this era? I don't know. I can't say firmly that he would be the same way I could say about Rock. Hogan was clearly number one. Savage was clearly number two. With Austin Rock, it was always a little bit different. You know, it was like Austin's right here, Rock is like right there, right underneath him. So a little bit different. But I think Savage, like I put Savage like above guys like Eddie Guerrero, Roman Reigns, you know, Edge, Orton, guys like that, Jericho.
Batistas, yeah, those
Yeah,
guys, yeah,
yeah, I have
yeah,
him firmly above those guys, but just behind. Like for me, I put him right there with Triple H, Andre the Giant, Brock Lesnar. He's
Bret
right.
Hart,
Yeah, Bret
yeah,
Hart. He's right in
yeah,
line with those guys.
yeah.
Just maybe slightly above those guys. That's a different conversation. You could put him maybe
Mm.
above Bret Hart, Triple H. You know, it's a different conversation.
Yeah, no, you've answered that literally exactly how I would answer it. I'm not just going to regurgitate what you just said. My answer, I fully agree with Kevin on that. He's not the absolute top tier one, which is the guys who carried the company, or in the case of The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, guys who are like top tier main eventers or upper mid card guys for over 2 decades with the longevity of just greatness. He's not, Savage isn't quite there. He's on that other tier where it's, the absolute fringe of that tier one, but not quite there. And you mentioned the guys around that: Andre, Bret Hart, Brock Lesnar, Triple H. It's kind of semantics, really. Who's where? Who do you prefer? Whose stint? Whose peak do you prefer? That's all semantics. We'll debate that later in the year when we do our top 50. That's going to be a big
Yeah,
time elite heat series we do, which I look
yeah.
forward to doing. That's going to be a saucy debate,
Oh
pal. But
yeah.
yeah, no, that's gonna be. I'd say yeah, somewhere between maybe. If you want to be really positive, Savage probably like top, maybe 8, but realistic 8 to 12, 8 to 13, somewhere in that around 10ish for Randy Savage. Just an absolute legend. So there you have it.
There it is, pal. Lovely. Yeah, Randy Savage, one of the absolute greatest of all time, and I think we did him justice with this bio. I think this was unlike the A&E hit piece, pal.
Mm.
This was a genuine love story to one of the greatest characters of all time. He gave us all countless memories that grew up and watched him, and you know those of us that got to rewatch his content through the network and Peacock and binge and all that. Can't thank
Mm.
Savage enough for everything he's done for the wrestling business, and it's been a pleasure just going back watching his old promos, and yeah, one of the absolute best.
No, 100%. And I like that we do this with these wrestler bios, and we don't do them too often. I mean, the Angle one was 6, 8 weeks ago now. We do them maybe, every now and then, but they're reserved for guys who deserve them. Guys who deserve hour and a half, 2 hours, just in-depth praise, discussion, legacy talk. And Savage is no exception to that. He's one of the absolute all-time greats, and as you mentioned, the five-tool player. He could do everything. He had no real weaknesses that I can think of off the top of my head. And yeah, it's a legacy that speaks for itself. And one thing I want to touch on as well: some people may listen to this, watch this, and go, "You didn't really cover the WCW stuff per se." Really, Kevin, in my eyes, with Randy Savage, the WWE stint, the mid '80s through until near enough mid '90s WWE stint, that is the heartbeat of Randy Savage. That's like the skeleton of his career. The WCW stuff, you mentioned the match against Diamond Dallas Page and some other matches he had per se from mid '90s through like late '90s in WCW. He was there. He was involved in some marquee big matches in WCW at like pay-per-views and what have you. But none of that, in my eyes at least, maybe to listeners, but in my eyes at least, none of that had the impact of what his WWE stuff did. So that's what we wanted to talk about with this Randy Savage bio. His most impactful, most significant, most important stuff, which just happens to be the WWE stuff, and really the sort of, as Kevin touched on, the behind the scenes, the legacy, the how he's remembered. So yeah.
Yeah, one of the most fascinating characters on screen, behind the scenes. Just everything about Randy Savage is so fascinating. Now, I want to transition here to our Around the World segment. So we were talking about the WWE Hall of Fame being a joke. Now, Randy Savage not being in the Hall of Fame while he's alive, not being inducted in the Hall of Fame, I should say, is like, it's the equivalent of the Baseball Hall of Fame not having Barry Bonds in there. It's like that. Barry Bonds, for those of you who know, Barry Bonds, one of the greatest baseball players to ever live. And I've said this before, the WWE Attitude Era is a lot like the steroid era of baseball. Household names, Ken Griffey Jr., Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds, Mark McGwire, all these guys that have legacies, Derek Jeter, all these dudes, they have legacies that live on now. And baseball, in a large part, lives off that time frame. Kind of how WWE lives off the Attitude Era. And, WWE's moving forward, they're thriving way more than the MLB is, so the comparison doesn't really hold up. But the Baseball Hall of Fame, this is a little bit of rant, and I've been on this rant for a while, and I need to get it off in a public forum, I guess.
Yeah.
So, Randy Savage not being in the Hall of Fame, joke. Absolute joke. Disgusting. It invalidated the WWE Hall of Fame. I know he got in, but like you said, begrudgingly, that's a great word. Barry Bonds has been ruled ineligible to be inducted into the Hall of Fame because of this silly rule that after, I don't know what it is, 6-7 times on the ballot, if you don't get inducted, you're not going in the Hall of Fame. This is a legitimate sports organization that has a legitimate, real Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York, that you can go visit with plaques. It doesn't make sense to me that you cannot tell the story of baseball without Barry Bonds, without Roger Clemens, without Sammy Sosa, without Mark McGwire, without Alex Rodriguez. I know everybody hates Alex Rodriguez. I understand. But Alex Rodriguez, whether you like it or not, is one of the greatest players to ever lace up a pair of cleats. One of the best to ever do it. Him and Barry Bonds not being in the Hall of Fame, it invalidates it. What's the point of having a Hall of Fame? It's like having an NBA Hall of Fame. Literally, this is not an exaggeration. This, in NBA terms, it's like having an NBA Hall of Fame without Shaq, or without Tim Duncan, or Kobe.
Or Magic Johnson, someone like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And baseball allowed them to cheat. That's the problem. Baseball allowed it to happen. They knew everybody was doing steroids. And then, the whole thing with WWE happens, and Hogan, and all this, and then they're like, oh, you guys can't do steroids anymore. Bro, MLB players used to do cocaine in the locker room, or in the dugout. There's a documentary on the 86 Mets, the most coked out team in sports history. The 86 Mets, Darryl Strawberry, Dwight Gooden, Gary Carter, Ron Darling, all these guys used to do cocaine in the dugout during games. The MLB is, it's so flawed. It annoys me so much. They allowed players this is a recent thing. They allowed players to use sticky stuff. It's the stuff that actors use when they play Spider-Man to make the webs. It's stuff like that. They were used that to get a grip on the baseball and increase the spin rate. And then what happens eventually, the pitchers start striking out batters too much, and nobody wants to watch baseball anymore because it sucks. And you're just watching power hitters get struck out by guys that are using sticky stuff and throwing 96-mile-per-hour changeups, striking everybody out. Nobody wants to watch baseball anymore. So you know what the MLB does? Blame the pitchers. We allowed them to use the fucking sticky stuff, but we blame the pitchers. Same thing with the steroids. We knew Barry Bonds was doing steroids. Barry Bonds was a Hall of Famer before the steroids. Barry Bonds was like a 3-time MVP before he even injected a steroid in his veins. He injected steroids to get better with age. To be 37, hitting 47 home runs. It's ridiculous, bro. Disgusting. I hate it. I love and hate baseball. I love and hate it. I can't live without it. I watch it every day. I complain about it, but it just annoys me so much, man.
Kevin, and one more thing on that. Well, firstly, yes, I'm a Diamondbacks fan. Admittedly, I know next to nothing about baseball. I know who Barry Bonds is. So that right there, that is a Hall of Fame first ballot guy, I'd assume. But as you say, I guess not. One thing I want to discuss now, this may seem like I know nothing. I want a genuine question here. You talk about the steroid era with baseball. When I think steroids, essentially, I think, bodybuilding or one of these ones where yes, you can be natural, but you enhance your like physique, and it's obvious you're on steroids. It's really performance enhancing, veins popping out, you're bigger. Like that's what I think with steroids. Baseball it's a hand-eye coordination sport. You throw it, and you got to actually hit the ball to do it. How is steroids that detrimental to like the legacy of that? Because I mean, I guess the stronger players is that like what's the deal with like I hear about the steroid era all the time when it comes to baseball. That's what I hear. The Yankees and every other team was on steroids, and it was the league and a certain time period with steroids. But how does steroids really change baseball all that much when it's a hand-eye coordination game?
But for guys like Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, who were already all-time greats before the steroids, it just made them better as they got older. Barry Bonds hit 70 home runs in a season. I want to say, somebody will correct me. He hit he broke the record for a single season of all-time home runs, and he was like 38. So it was because of the steroids. Like I said, before the steroids, Barry Bonds already won MVPs, already one of the best players in the game. Then he did steroids when he was like 34, 35, and you can see it. You look up old pictures of Barry Bonds when he played for the Pirates. He's a skinny guy, in good shape, could run, could steal bases, could do it all. Then when he played for the Giants in his older era, he was just big, just a truck,
Okay.
The same with Roger Clemens. And then you have guys like David Ortiz, who's in the Hall of Fame. David Ortiz, a known steroid abuser, is in the Hall of Fame. But everybody loves Big Papi. He's a guy with a smile. He's got the accent. It's more political, and I'm not going to get into that. It's a more political game with A-Rod and Barry Bonds, especially. But yeah, so with David Ortiz, he's the skinny guy, all stick and bones. There we go.
Skin and bones, yeah.
And he's playing for the Minnesota Twins. He gets cut by the Twins in the minor leagues. Career is floundering. Starts injecting the needle pal. Shows up out of nowhere and becomes one of the greatest baseball players of all time. One of the most iconic players of all time for the Red Sox. And it's just like, oh, we love the Red Sox. We love David Ortiz. He's in the Hall of Fame. No big deal. He was a literal nobody. And that's the same thing that happened with McGwire and Sammy Sosa. They were nobodies. They started doing steroids. They got jacked up. They were able to hit the ball further after doing steroids.
So I guess it's that. So that's sort of what I'm saying. So I guess power, and you mentioned with Bonds and these other guys, when they're getting older, I guess would it be a concentration or like that sort of thing?
Like recovery. Like recovery. So they could so they could perform like they were 28,
Okay. No, that makes sense. Yeah, no, I just wanted to just clarify with that because I mean, obviously, I'm just some absolute scrub with baseball. I want to get the kind of clarity with that. So that makes sense. That's fair. But for Bonds not to be in the Hall of Fame, that's just dumb. Even I've heard of him. It's as you say, the same thing as Magic Johnson or Shaquille O'Neal not being in the and that's the thing with Randy Savage. It's the same thing as Magic Johnson or Larry Bird or Shaquille O'Neal not being in the Hall of Fame in the NBA or the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. It's a joke. It's stupid. So there you go.
Yeah, absolutely disgusting.
Revolting. Also, pal, one more thing. I'll say for our listeners here, SummerSlam preview show is coming in the next couple of days. It's SummerSlam week. Let's go, pal. Big show. Kevin, we're going to do our big SummerSlam preview with a lot more juicy current stuff. But real quick, one wrestling-related question, just as a little teaser preview for that show. Where's your excitement at? Because before we started recording this, you didn't seem too keen with SummerSlam. Was that correct?
I wouldn't say it's not that I'm not too keen, but it's just like there's no hype for it for me. I'm just like, okay, SummerSlam's happening. It's just a lot of rematches. Do we need to see Cody? Right. Like, do we need to see Cody and Brock again? Like,
park this. This is enough of a teaser, enough of a preview. We'll save that for next time, listeners. Get ready to go off on Kevin for not being excited, pal. No. There's that. Around the world. Randy Savage, larger than life, an absolute all-time great. Kevin, it's been a good one. Quality bio as always. I'm going to get to making some clips. We've had a number in this show that'll be really good. So, yeah, easy.
Peace.